John Bolton's tenure in the first administration came to an abrupt end in 2019 when he was fired by tweet. In the years that followed, he's become one of the president's biggest critics.
Well, we're going to get into those details with our panel later this hour. But first, let's speak to our State Department correspondent, Tom Bateman, who's been following developments. Actually, first, we're going to go to our panel. We'll hear from Tom Bateman later on. Lewis, if you'd like to perhaps introduce who we're hearing from.
Yeah, hello to our panel. Good evening to you. This is, let me introduce you, former Republican strategist and federal prosecutor Joe Moreno and former Democratic Congressman Stephanie Murphy. Hello to you both. We've got plenty to get through, big stories, big developments, but I want to focus because over the last few hours we will have seen those images of those raids taking place. Joe, should we start with you? First of all, just your initial reaction when you saw those images.
Hey, Rich, disappointed. Whether this is a righteous case or not a righteous case against Ambassador Bolton is almost beside the point. It's so clearly a continuation of the lawfare we've seen. And I understand from the president's perspective that he felt like he was a victim of some pretty aggressive and some would say even, abusive use of the legal system. But the worst thing he can do is continue it. And so now it's clear that between Adam Schiff and Letitia James in New York and now Ambassador Bolton, the powers of the government are being used against people. And it's a trend that will be difficult to stop now that it's continuing.
Listening to that, Stephanie and Joe, so we're going to come back to our panel. Joe, just want to start with you. Of course, any reflections on anything you heard there? But I specifically wanted to ask you about one of the points you raised earlier on about this happening. In your eyes, this effectively now we're on this ladder, down this path, it being difficult to stop. Is there a kind of counter-argument there that actually Donald Trump's first term was characterised by an unusual number of hirings and enemies made? And that there is a peculiarity about Donald Trump specifically, and therefore the perception that his enemies are going to be gone after in this way, or not?
Well, he certainly doesn't help the tenor of things and the way he handles his personnel. I agree with everything that Jamil and Stephanie just said, and it's absolutely imperative that classified information be handled properly. However, there's a piece of context missing here, which is that this case was already investigated back in 2020. A grand jury was convened under the first Trump administration, then it was dropped under the Biden administration. There was also a civil lawsuit that was ultimately dropped. And so, again, absolutely, if Ambassador Bolton did something wrong here, at a minimum, he could face 10-year prison sentence under the Espionage Act. But the fact that it's been reopened 6 years later, that concerns me. And so absolutely the law should be followed. But do we really want to be doing this sort of thing and reopening old wounds? Because I don't see it stopping if this is going to be the path we go down.
Joe, Stephanie, not sure whether this is going to quell the masses. Do you think this will keep conspiracy theorists and critics alike happy that this transcript has now come out?
There's a component of the MAGA base that's very suspicious of anything government related. And kind of when they get a conspiracy like this, it's hard to kind of kill it. One thing that was never made logical sense to me is that Donald Trump, under his first administration, brought the charges against Jeffrey Epstein in 2019. And then when Epstein killed himself, the Trump administration brought the charges against Ghislaine Maxwell in 2020. So the idea that he ever tried to bury this case never made sense because he's the one who prosecuted the cases. So it's sort of a silly roundabout kind of conspiracy theory. I hope it dies. I mean, it's sort of that case that never goes away. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Doesn't really spend a lot of usefulness, spending time on it. But who knows? I mean, again, in the minds of some people, these things never die.
Now, famine has been confirmed in Gaza City and the surrounding area for the first time. That's according to a UN-backed food security body, the IPC.
Well, the IPC says more than 500,000 Palestinians are facing starvation and more than 130,000 children under the age of 5 could die from acute malnutrition, and that 41,000 of these children will experience severe malnutrition, putting them at heightened risk of death.
The IPC says the famine affects Gaza City and its surrounding area. It's predicted to spread in the next few weeks to Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis. it was unable to fully assess the situation in the remaining 2 areas of Gaza.
Well, Israel says there's no famine in the territory and has rejected today's report as false and biased.
Well, we've had some reaction from world leaders. UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy condemned the news, adding, quote, "The Israeli government's refusal to allow sufficient aid into Gaza has caused this man-made catastrophe. This is a moral outrage." Let's bring our panel back in. Joe Moreno and also Stephanie Murphy. Joe, I want to start with you. How significant do you think this confirmation, how significant do you think this day is?
Well, look, I hate to sound skeptical of the UN, but it's basing its data largely on the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza. Hamas is a terrorist organization, right? They pride themselves in their jihadist fundamentalist views of killing civilians, right? They started this entire process by massacring Jews on October 7th. They embody themselves in hospitals and schools and tunnel networks. Israel, on the other hand, Israel is a professional, uniformed military with a long history of observing the laws of war. So if it's one or the other, I'm going to believe Israel over Hamas. Hamas can also end this conflict anytime they want by laying down their arms and walking away. They insist on staying in power in the West Bank. This is of their own doing, so it's horrible, any suffering. But if it comes between one and the other, I'm believing Israel over Hamas and the UN.
You're with BBC News, good to be back with you. Now, the Trump administration's law enforcement crackdown on Washington, D.C. has taken another step today. The Pentagon has announced that National Guard troops patrolling the streets of the nation's capital will now be armed. Nearly 2,000 National Guard members are in the city, brought in as part of a crackdown on what the president's labelled an epidemic of crime. Federal agents have also been deployed, and the president said he was temporarily taking over the Metropolitan Police Department.
National Guard has not taken part in law enforcement. They're mainly stationed at landmarks like the National Mall. On Thursday, the president visited a command centre in the city's southeast, thanking officers and talking up what he called incredible results from the crackdown. And today, he hinted other cities are in his sight.
You know, I really am honored that the National Guard has done such an incredible job working with the police. And we haven't had to bring in the regular military, which we're willing to do. We have to. And after we do this, we'll go to another location and we'll make it safe also. We're going to make our country very safe. We're going to make our cities very, very safe. Chicago's a mess. You have an incompetent mayor, grossly incompetent. And we'll straighten that one out probably next. That'll be our next one after this. And it won't even be tough. And the people in Chicago, Mr. Vice President, are screaming for us to come. They're wearing red hats, just like this one. But they're wearing red hats. African-American ladies, beautiful ladies, are saying, please, President Trump, come to Chicago. Please. I did great with the black vote, as you know, and they want something to happen. So I think Chicago will be our next.
Well, let's go back to our panel tonight, Joe Moreno and Stephanie Murphy. Joe, I'll begin with you, if I may. Now, President Trump threatened to, quote, send in the feds to Chicago during his first administration. That didn't happen. We heard him now saying Chicago may be next here in Washington. But are the goalposts shifting here? Because originally it was federal troops, National Guard to support law enforcement, but no guns. Now guns, but for the 30-day limit that President Trump's allowed. Now he's saying potentially he'll declare a national emergency to extend that limit. Is this creeping federal control in, first of all, Washington, and then who knows where next?
So I'm really split on this issue. I don't have much of a problem with Donald Trump commandeering the Metropolitan Police Department in D.C. D.C. is a mess, and that is a power that's specifically given to him under the Home Rule Act. So if he wants to exercise that power, that's fine. And the fact that the mayor's office is going to court to stop that is a real waste of taxpayer money. That being said, use of the military, whether it's the National Guard or the federal military, that's problematic. And I say that as someone with absolute respect. I served over 20 years in the Army. I have tremendous respect for the men and women in our military. But we are trained to be a lethal force. We are not police officers. We are not peacekeepers. We are not trained in Fourth Amendment processes of searches and seizures. And so my fear is that it's just a matter of time before something happens. And then we say this was not a proper use of our military, which is meant to defend the country against external forces, not as an internal domestic police force. So that's my concern.
Stephanie. OK, we're going to end the Context USA with time for the panel. And this is where our panellists get to highlight stories they're interested in. Joe, let's start with you.
So I have been second to none in my criticism of the lawfare that was waged against Donald Trump the last 4 years. And I think I was partially vindicated in my criticism this week when the $500 million fine sought by Letitia James and provided by Judge Engoron in New York City against Donald Trump was thrown out on appeal in New York State. That's a great thing. That was an absolutely nonsensical case that never should have been brought, starting with the fact that the Attorney General in New York campaigned on finding a way to get Donald Trump. That is Soviet-era misuse of the legal system. Kind of comes full circle to my initial point, though, about Ambassador Bolton, because if it's bad against one, it's bad against another. And so, and again, I fear about this path. And I understand Donald Trump's desire for retribution, but this is a path that we should not go on because it'll never stop.
Joe, there was a distinction between the case and the penalty, though, wasn't it? Everything thrown out was to do with the fine and the penalty rather than the original fraud. Stephanie, just briefly on that, it does circle back to what we were talking about at the top of the show. Are they sentiments that you would echo?
Yeah, I think, we have to be very careful that we don't create mistrust among the American people in their judicial system. We know that their trust in their legislative system, the Congress, is at an all-time low. We can't see things happening that reinforce the sense that the system is rigged.
OK, right. We've covered that off at the beginning and at the end of the show. Stephanie, it's your time for the panel now. What story do you want to talk about?
I want to talk about something that I think is really exciting. Denmark has pledged to abolish its book tax, and who doesn't like a tax cut? But I think this is particularly interesting because Denmark is doing this to make literature more accessible to everyone. And I am living in a state where Florida has actually banned books, making literature less accessible. They've removed hundreds, maybe thousands of titles from school libraries, among them books like The Diary of Anne Frank and I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. These are books that I grew up reading that I think future generations of Americans should have access to. And yet here in Florida, we are banning these books. So it was a ray of hope for me from Denmark to see a country value literature and the access to it.
Joe, something you support?
Absolutely, absolutely. I have 9 kids, and the more they read, the better.
9? OK, that's a good note to finish on. A good time to release a book in Denmark as well. I suppose I'll spot up on my Danish and get writing. Listen, brilliant panel as always. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Stephanie. We'll see you both again very soon. Thank you.
Great weekend.